Good evening and welcome to the Corner Kick. Now, today we're going to have a very special guest, Bob of Speaker's Corner, and he's going to talk about whether the Quran and the Hadiths can be trusted. Now, I'm just going to say something very quickly in Danish, and then we'll switch to English again for the remainder of the live stream. Velkommen til Hjørnesparket. Vi kommer til i dag til at livestream på engelsk, så det her det er egentlig bare lige for de af jer, som nu ser det på dansk, at I er klar over, at det kommer altså til at foregå på engelsk. Man er dog meget velkommen til at stille spørgsmål i live-chatten på dansk, hvis man vil det, eller tysk, det må du også gerne, og så skal jeg nok oversætte det til Bob. Men det er jo sådan set ordene. Nu går jeg lige tilbage til engelsk. Right, so that was my little Danish speak. Let's return to the issue of today and our guest, Bob of Speaker's Corner. And welcome to the stage, Bob.
Thank you very much, brother. I'm pleased to be here at last. We've talked about doing this for so long, and our first run ran into some kind of technical problem, and now here we are again, and finally we've got it sorted. So I'm very pleased.
That's good. What I'm noticing is you've removed much of your beard since we last spoke.
Yes, this is true.
Yeah.
I like to mix it up. I like to, and yours is grown, you know.
Yes.
But I like to mix it up and change things around from time to time. So, you know, I get
keep
bored at the same face.
Yeah.
So
true, and keeping people on their toes as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so that's good. Right, so the I don't know how many of my viewers know you, but I think most of them do. Both the Danish viewers and of course also the English-speaking viewers for today. But maybe you should start by just talking a bit about who you are, and then just kind of just slide into the subject of today.
Sure,
if that's okay.
So, yeah. And then if you feel like jumping in on anything or interrupting to make a comment, question, feel free. And then obviously you mentioned something about the possibility of the audience coming on as well, and that's totally fine. So I go by the pseudonym Bob of Speaker's Corner. It's not my real name. It's a stage name that I use. And the Speaker's Corner bit is connected to a park in London where people go on a Sunday to debate. And Christians and Muslims go down there to evangelize and to do dawah, and engage in polemical and apologetical conversation. And from that work, I've developed a ministry where I come on channels like yours and talk, and having an interview with different channels and podcasts to talk about this issue, to do training with churches and evangelistic and missionary groups, as well as doing actual one-to-one evangelism outside of the park, either in in-person meetings or Zoom calls, correspondence with lots and lots of people. And then, as you know, retreats where, the occasional retreat. I run a blog. I write for the blog. I've produced a number of apps that people can download on their phone, an apologetics app and an economy app. And so I do things that I think are there to try and strengthen the church. So you can think of me as an activist, apologist, evangelist. And part of what I've done and been involved in is developing critiques of Islam, which I will now move into, because obviously Muslims is another major global faith that makes great claims for itself, and is a competitive faith to the Christian faith in that it is missionary. And the average Muslim already has a number of critiques of Christianity embedded in the Quran, embedded in Islam. It's part of everyday conversation to have critiques of Christianity within many Muslim circles. Whereas the average Christian is not so inclined and certainly not so equipped. And so I and a number of others have been developing critiques of Islam to equip Christians to help them if they should need to use them. And so I'm going to present a very basic critique of both the Quran and the Hadiths now. And as I say, feel free to jump in at leisure. And if people want to come in and talk, and you're happy to let them on, I'm happy to talk with them as well.
So just one thing, is usually I put some of the comments on the screen just to engage people, and there's been a few. Let's see. So Professor Yaffle says hello there.
I know Professor Yaffle.
Okay, and Patrick P says hi,
How
Bob.
are you doing, Patrick?
Yeah. Patrick is one of my usuals. So Lance Apollinaire says hi, Bob.
How are we doing?
Yeah. Oh, and another one from Professor Yaffle. Okay, so good to see you both. That's So that's some of it. Now,
Right.
And then there's a comment from Snowy, who's one of my regulars as well. He just says that he went to Speaker's Corner for the first time in the late 80s. It's changed quite a bit since then. And
It really has.
I would agree.
I don't know if have you ever been to Speaker's Corner before?
Only from the outside. I've never been actually in the park, but from the outside, I've seen it. Yes.
Maybe one day we can get you down to the park to do a session.
Oh yeah, that'd be good.
You're more than welcome. But the park really has changed. It used to be about politics and different political persuasions, but then as more and more Muslims moved into Edgware Road, the Muslim contingent down at the park increased to the point that it has become a major missionary, a Muslim missionary effort. Which, when these debates started being filmed, I think maybe 10 years ago, grew in how much of a missionary effort it was, because now people were watching from all over the world. Christians have only just got up to parity, I would say. It wasn't a very effective evangelistic stage for Muslims. They were making lots of converts about 6 years ago. But thankfully, because we've got the right kind of Christians coming down to the corner these days, we've kind of clogged them up. I just heard a big bing. Did you?
Yeah, I just touched my microphone.
Oh wow, that's a sensitive microphone. So in the last 6 years, we've managed to clog up and shut down this missionary effort that they've been developing at Speaker's Corner. We haven't stopped it, but we have certainly slowed it down to a crawl, because the right kind of Christians are coming down to the corner. Muslims tried to sort of capture Speaker's Corner and drive out all the other groups a few years back. There was a concerted effort to do so by some Muslims at the corner, and they drove out a lot of groups. But the Christians were the ones that just wouldn't budge. And now I would say that it's become quite apparent that the Christians have won the debate at Speaker's Corner, because their big speakers can't tackle our big speakers. And they're reduced to just trying to find young, naive tourists and children. Whereas the Christian speakers are able to engage with anybody. Whereas their big speakers are only able to engage with kids and tourists, and so it's a sign really that we've won the debate at Speaker's Corner. But it has certainly changed from what it was to what it is. Shall I jump in with start my presentation and get going, and you just?
I think you should. And just for the audience, if you want to ask questions, feel free to do so in the live chat in the beginning, and then later on, maybe we'll open up for a live appearance on the screen. But for now, just in the live chat, please. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about obviously two things, as the title agrees, or states. We're going to talk about the Quran and the Hadiths and whether they can be trusted. Now, when it comes to trusting the Quran makes bold claims for itself. And I would say that if the Quran makes bold claims for itself, and then it self-evidently fails those bold claims, then we have good reasons to say that the Quran can't be trusted. I think that's fair. Like, if I made great claims for myself that I'm the best athlete in the world, that I'm the I can run the longest, the fastest, jump the highest, the furthest, throw the longest, the heaviest, pick the heaviest. If I made all these bold claims about myself and then was put up in a test against a real athlete and came out failing, everyone would know that my claims are false and that I couldn't be trusted about the claims that I have made for myself. Well, the Quran makes those kinds of claims. It makes three principal claims: the claim of inability, inimitability. There we go. When I get my teeth in, inimitability, which is the idea that the Quran is a unique vessel of literature that no one can imitate. And then the idea that the Quran is secure and safe and free from all contradictions and errors. And finally, that the Quran is preserved, protected, and unchanged. And on this three-legged stool, the authority of the Quran rests. And the idea that it is from God is placed on this three-legged stool. So if we actually start looking at whether the Quran meets these challenges that it puts down, then I think we're going to see quite clearly that it doesn't actually stand up to any of them, any of these claims, as it is something that could be challenged. The claim that it is inimitable, it is a completely subjective claim. If you believe that the Quran is from God, am I still there, bro? Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
It's just that the screen's frozen on my end. If you believe that the Quran is from God, then that means you're going to believe that no one can imitate it. It's a self-validating argument that's dependent upon your beliefs about the Quran. The problem with that, of course, is that it means that it's unverifiable. And the problem with an unverifiable argument being given as a proof means that it shows bad logic on the part of Allah. He's claiming something as a proof that no one can test. And if you're going to claim something as a proof that no one can test, it means that you're a really bad philosopher. You're a really bad expositor of truth. You're a really poor communicator.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Now, because what I'm thinking is first and foremost that the procedure of the logic is kind of reversed. It's like if A leads to B, it does not necessarily mean that B is always the result of A. Yeah. So when we're talking about this, it's like it seems reasonable to say that if the Quran comes from the Almighty Creator of all and is directly from Him, then it would be perfect in some sense, without the ability to imitate it. But that does not mean that if you cannot imitate it, then it must be from the Almighty Creator. So that's the problem.
Well, and it's also the logic is, if A then B, if B then C, where A is it is it is inimitable. You can't imitate it, therefore it's from God. Well, actually, in the Muslim mind, that logic is reversed. They believe that it's from God, therefore it can't be imitated, and therefore nobody can imitate it.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter who does. And arguably that challenge has been met. Al-Safi and Al-Mahdi were two Christians. They released a true Furqan, which was a Christian poem that was written in Arabic. And deliberately they wrote it to imitate the style of the Quran, right? It was translated into English by evangelists under the late inspiration of the great evangelist Anis Shoresh. And what they used to do is they would read this Quran in public on the street. They'd read the true Furqan, and they'd do it deliberately in Muslim areas to unsuspecting Muslims, who actually then went on to thank these Arab Christians for reciting the Quran in public, because they thought they were Muslim reading the Quran, but they weren't reading the Quran at all.
I think Nabil Qureshi writes about this in his book "Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus."
Yeah,
as I recall. Yeah,
I'm quite sure it is. I've not read what Nabil Qureshi wrote on that, but I know the testimony of the people that wrote the Furqan. Then you've got people like Ibn al-Mukaffa, who is a critic of the Quran, who attempted to imitate it. You've got Bashar ibn Burd, Abdul Atahiyah, al-Mutanabi, and al-Ma'ari. And all of these people believed that they could imitate the Quran. Now, the problem is that the denial that they had imitated the Quran is based entirely upon one's own personal beliefs prior to ever hearing what they've got to say. The other problem is that the Quran it has obviously borrowed from other texts. There's clear evidence of borrowing in terms of the stories and of the content and of the substance of the Quran. You've got, this includes from Mishnah Sanhedrin 4:5, the Targum of Jonathan ben Uzai, the Targum of Sheni, the Midrash of Genesis 38:11-13, the Pseudo Gospel of Matthew chapter 20, the Domitian of Mary, the life of Adam and Eve, in the story of Adam and Eve, and stories also from the infancy gospel. And these are covering stories like the Adam and Eve story, like the infancy of Jesus, the miracles of Jesus, the story of Solomon and Bathsheba, ideas like, he who kills a single soul kills the whole of humanity or the whole world. These are well established examples of copying. But there's also there's also this idea of the Quran having an internal contradiction. I'm sure you know about the Surah of the Jinn. The Surah of the Jinn is that a couple of jinn heard the Quran and then went off to have a conversation with other jinn about the fact that they'd heard this prophet and heard him recite the Quran. And then there's an entire chapter's worth of verse after verse after verse after verse of their speech with one another
in the Quran,
which Allah quotes ad verbatim. So Allah is quoting ad verbatim, ayah after ayah after ayah of the speech of the jinn in his Quran, which means that people have spoke more than a single ayah of something that is equivalent to the Quran. And Allah
Yeah.
has testified that it is the equivalent to the Quran because he's put it inside his Quran.
Yeah.
So Allah himself has testified that these people have, spoken at length words as beautiful as his own because he's put them inside the Quran.
Yeah. So basically, the jinn have already met the challenge.
According to Allah, according to Allah's own witness. And so you've got a flawed logic. Go on.
Just to be sure that everyone follows, because I've had this comment: do not imitate the Bible. Clarify, please. It's about the Quran claiming that no one can imitate the Quran and make it such that it's on the height of the Quran. That's the point. Just to clarify.
Yeah, we're not talking about imitating the Bible.
No.
I think that people can imitate the Bible in terms of, quote, literary style, in Hebrew and in Greek. There's no kind of sense of inimitability about the Bible. The thing that is miraculous about the Bible is how the Bible is so interwoven within its own narrative.
Yeah.
Of the crossing over of themes, the reemergence of themes, the development of themes, and that all of these books and that all of these developments and interwovenness is done over decades worth of books written over centuries of time by decades worth of people. And there's just there's no, but yet the Bible looks like there is a coordinating hand behind all of the literature.
I was very fascinated by this very experience when I began when I was saved. I began reading the Bible from cover to cover, and this was one of the things that really fascinated me, because when I was reading, it was like, and when I read the whole thing through and then started over, it was like again and again I would read a passage and think, oh wait, it does say something similar or something that connects to this in that book and in that book. So it's like a whole new world just kind of opened for me as I read the Bible again.
Amen. And I think what you've got to realize is that so in this first part, the first part of the problem is that the test itself is flawed. Allah has given a test that doesn't make any sense. And then the second point is that it clearly has already been met. There's and the Quran itself acknowledges the fact that the stories inside the Quran were something that was commonly known. So when, for example, Surah 531 seems to be a copy of the Targum of Jonathan ben Azai, or Surah 27:16 seems to be a copy of Targum Sheni. In Surah 6:25, the Quran states that people were complaining to Muhammad that they'd heard these stories before. These were the stories of the ancients. And so clearly people had heard these stories before, and that was one of their principal objections to the Quran. And so the idea that we're finding stories in the Quran that have been borrowed from elsewhere, as well as the fact that Allah quotes the jinn in his own book at length, thus demonstrating that the jinn have already produced a surah like unto it, or an ayah like unto it. So it's a flawed test, but it's already been met. Now, the next claim that the Quran makes for itself is in Surah 482. Will they not at least try to understand this Quran? If it had been from anyone but God, they would have found many inconsistencies in it. Now, there's the problem with that is that when we, who the challenge is to, bother to look at the Quran to see if there are any consistencies in it, rather than coming away with the idea that there are no inconsistencies in it, we come away with the fact that there are lots of inconsistencies in it. So, for example, In Surah 1886, the Quran claims that the sun sets in a puddle of mud or of murky water.
Yeah.
In Surah 36, ayah 38 to 40, it erroneously claims that the night cannot overtake the day. Well, we know anyone who's ever seen a solar eclipse knows that night certainly does overtake the day. It's daylight, but if you're inside the solar eclipse, then it is certainly not daylight there. Even birds go to sleep. And you're there in pitch black. You're there in the middle of darkness, and so night does overtake the day. The best one for me, the one that's the funniest I find, is in Surah 86, 6-7, where it says that sperm comes from between the ribs and the backbone. I was recently involved in a debate with a Muslim from, I think, Australia or New Zealand. And he was so raked over on this question of where sperm comes from that he was in the unenviable situation of having to pretend that he didn't know where sperm was produced or where his testicles were. That's literally in his desperation to defend the Quran. He had to be obtuse around these things. Because he couldn't, he knew that he was in for a storming if he admitted that he knew sperm came from testes and that testes were between your legs.
It's very general.
And he did it with a straight face.
When pressured, when pressured on these issues, Muslims really say the craziest things. Yeah,
I think so. And if there are any Muslims who want to try and convince us all how sperm is produced between the backbone and the ribs, I'd love to hear you try. So you've got scientific errors in the Quran, scientific inconsistencies, but it's not just scientific inconsistency. You've also got historical inconsistencies. So ridiculously, the Quran is the only book of that claims that Christ was not crucified. In Surah 4:157, when all the evidence argues the opposite. It identifies Samaritans as being alive at the time of Moses. In Surah 20, ayah 85 to 87, and verses 95 to 97 of the same surah. And then it ridiculously claims that there was chainmail, which in medieval times people would just call mail, but there was chainmail at the time of King David in Surah 34:11. So these are clear and evident historical inconsistencies where the weight of evidence contradicts the clear understanding of history that we find in the Quran. And then you've also got internal contradictions as well. So, for instance, the Quran claims that Allah is both the owner of everything and the inheritor of everything. In Surahs 15:23 and Surah 3:189, Allah is and then also in Surah 3:180 and Surah 19:40. And you can't be both. If you're the owner of everything, then you're not the inheritor of it. If you're the inheritor of everything, you're not the owner of it. Like, you can't inherit what you already own.
And what I'm thinking about some like what I'm thinking with this about this passage is that it's an example where something was put into the Quran without the author really knowing what it meant, because this makes very good. It makes all kinds of sense in a Trinitarian view of God, but because it's a Unitarian view of God, it doesn't work.
I think you actually give too much credit there. I don't think he's borrowed that from anyone or anything. I think that he's made claims without just thinking through what those claims are. I actually think that whoever authored the Quran just stuck stuff in without any coherent thought.
Yeah.
Because there is that paradox of inheritance and ownership within the Christian faith, with particularly with Jesus, who as God owns everything, but yet claims that he's receiving the kingdom, that he is, that it's going to be given to him. And it's like, well, how can it be given to him if he already owns it? But again, you've got to factor in the incarnation. And what's happening at the incarnation is that his humanity is being elevated to the standard of divinity, and what he has by right of his divinity, his humanity is now inheriting, is now being given, and so that's how that paradox is squared in the Christian faith. But there's no such vehicle to get around that problem in Islam. What they have to do instead is redefine inheritor to not mean anything about inheritance at all, but just mean someone who's everlasting or eternal. Which is like, well, I mean, that's there are words in Arabic for saying that, and inheritor is not one of them. Now, another example of contradiction in the Quran is that you've got the claim in the Quran that Allah is completely and totally independent from all of his creation, not needing his creation for anything in any way at any time. But then the Quran also states that Allah is merciful. Now, the thing is, as you think it out, mercy always requires a transaction between two parties, and so you cannot be merciful without someone to be merciful to. The act requires a second party, and so you've got this contradiction between the claim that the claim that Allah is completely independent of his creation in every possible way, at all possible times and in all possible conditions, but then this clear statement that Allah is merciful, which is which is an act that requires a third party.
Yeah, just
by
like
necessity.
And the same goes with love.
Yeah, love requires more than one party. So when Christians say God is love, we've got that paradox there, but that paradox is resolved by the fact of the Trinity. That the Father loves the Son loves the Father, and both love the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit loves both. And so you have this parties that share in a common love. But the Quran doesn't have a solution to that problem. Now, another problem is a simple synoptic problem. Is that you in Surah 7:109 and Surah 26:33, you have a synoptic accounts of the same story, where Moses, where Pharaoh is saying something in one passage, in one part of the story, but then in its comparative and its comparator in exactly the same part in the narrative. It's not Pharaoh that's speaking, but rather Pharaoh's advisors saying the same words. So who said the words? Was it Moses? Sorry, not my apologies. Was it Pharaoh to his advisors, or was it his advisors to Pharaoh?
Yeah.
Now that's a clear contradiction. Who said what to whom? And so this idea that the Quran is free from contradiction internally is also demonstrably false. And then we've also got examples of Quranic external errors, and that's this idea that the Quran makes claims that are just contradicted by facts outside of the Quran. So the Quran's description of the Trinity in Surah 5:73 and ayah 116 of the same chapter is just not accurate to what Christians believe. Invariably, when you look at what the Quran says about the Trinity, it says that we Christians believe in three gods, that those gods are Allah, Jesus, and Mary, and that we believe that Allah turned into Jesus. Now, if Allah is analogous to the Father, then that's saying that the Father turns into the Son. Now, all three of those statements are false. All three statements of the Quran about what we believe about the Trinity are false. Another one is that, you know, Allah had a son through Mary, through a consort, through some kind of physical union. This is obviously not what we believe as Christians. And so what we believe as Christians is objectively verifiable outside of the Quran. It's objectively verifiable before the Quran was even written. And so there's really no excuse for the Quran to be getting this basic info wrong if it truly is from Allah, you know. And then finally, another example of an external contradiction is that the Quran does exactly the same things, but now it does it for Jews. It says in Surah 9:30, it says that Ezra was the son of Allah, or that Jews took Ezra for the son of God. Now, no Jews ever did that, not in the sense that the Quran means it, not in the sense of, you know, that God can't have a son because he doesn't have a consort, you know, but rather that Ezra, you know, it would be in the sense of that Ezra is a son in the sense that he's a righteous man, he's a created being. And Muslims, or certainly the Dawagandists, would go along with that logic that you can call someone son if you mean by that they're created by Allah. So why would the Quran correct them for making a true statement? So clearly that's not what the Quran means when the Quran corrects the Jews for taking Ezra as a son of Allah. It obviously means something different. Well, what kind of sonship does the Quran condemn? It's the misunderstanding that, you know, it's the misunderstanding of Christian sonship, that the Quran thinks that Allah had sons by intimate relations. But that's obviously not anything that Jews believe. Jews don't believe that and never have done. So we've got these contradictions in the Quran, internally, externally, to do with history, to do with science. You know, we've got flawed tests of logic in terms of claiming its own inimitability, which is another inconsistency. You know, and yet the Quran claims that we shouldn't find any of that. You know, it's the Quran claiming that it's free from these things and that we shouldn't find them. And when I say we, the Quran is addressing Per Halbo and me in saying that we can't find, and not whether Muslims can find, but whether we can find in the Quran problems. And clearly we can. Now, so moving on to the third part, which is this idea that the Quran is something that has never been changed, ever. You know, this is something that Muslims used to boast of in huge ways prior until recent times. So, for example, M. Fethullah Gulen wrote in his Questions This Modern Age Puts to Islam. He stated this: the text of the Quran is entirely reliable. It has been as it is, unaltered, unedited, not tampered with in any way since the time of its revelation. Those were words published in 1993. More recently, in 1996, we had the claim by in the Basic Principles of Islam, published in Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates, by Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan charitable humanitarian foundation, we read these words: "No other book in the world can match the Quran. The astonishing fact about this book of Allah is that it has remained unchanged, even to a dot, over the last 1400 years. No variation of the text can be found in it. You can check this for yourself by listening to the recitations of Muslims from different parts of the world." Now, I could go on, but I have many quotes of a similar vein that I could quote to you, but you get the picture. The idea is
and
the Quran has been changed.
It looks as I'm not paying attention, but I am. But the thing is, I've got books on my shelves. Go
on, please share.
For example, I have this. This is the. Let's see. This is the. I think it's the Khalif. No, it's not. It's the Al-Kisai with Al-Duri and Abu Al-Harith. So
it's got two recitations, two different readings.
Yeah, and
could you show us a page? Could you just show us a page?
Yeah.
Just get it onto the camera so people can see it.
There you go.
And has it got the two readings side by side, or does it show them in
different colors? I think it's first one and then the other.
Ah, right. So they're sort of back to back.
So, yeah, and this is a small version of the Warsh recitation.
Right, which is different from the Hafs.
Yes, and So I have a few. This is the Khalaf.
Right.
There you go.
The Khalaf recitation.
Yeah. One of the differences between for example, the Khalaf and the both the Warsh and the Hafs is that in Surah 37:12, Allah says to Muhammad that. It's a phrase that says something like they mock. No, wait. You are surprised and they mock. But when you read the Khalaf version, it says I am surprised and they mock.
And that would be Allah speaking.
So that would be Allah speaking about himself as someone who's being surprised. But in the Warsh and the Hafs, it says, "You are surprised," and they mock.
Yeah, I've actually got some examples that we can talk about. So what we're talking about for the uninitiated, because we have just sort of stumbled into this as two people who kind of know what we're talking about. For those of you that don't know, that are looking into this, the Quran, Arabic today is written just in a consonantal form, without vowelizations. It's written in a classical form, where it is just a consonantal text, and the reader inserts the vowels themselves based upon the context of what they're reading. Now, to help you get your head around what I'm saying, I want you to take any text you like off the internet. And this is something all of you can do, right? Take any text you like off the internet in Danish or in English or in whichever language you're reading in. Remove all the vowel symbols, so all you're left is with the consonants, assuming that your language works with vowels and consonants. I don't know if there are any out there that don't. But once you've taken away all the vowels, right, go back and read it and insert the vowels that you should put in there. Now, the thing is, because of the rules of grammar and language, there's going to be some constructs where you see the vowel, where you see the consonants, and you will be forced to put in certain vowels. You can't put in any other vowels, because any other vowels would just come out as gobbledygook. It wouldn't come out as a word. So the first rule would be that any vowel you put in has to lead to an actual word being constructed. The second rule is that obviously it's got to make sense with the other words in the sentence. You can't just put in words that don't make sense. Yeah. The result of that is going to be that you're going to be able to put in pretty much all the right vowels and reproduce the text without much problem. And anyone else would be able to do the same as well. And I've done this experiment in real time with people in my apologetics class that I did. And pretty much everyone produced the same text, with some people producing words that didn't make sense, so they got excluded. Some people not creating words, some people adding consonants, and so they were excluded. And pretty much everyone was producing the same text, inserting the vowels because of the rules of the English language. And then there came one word that genuinely you could insert different vowels to get a different word out of the text, and both words would make sense within the wider text. And that meant that we had a real difference in the text that impacted the local meaning. And this is what Pehalbo's talking about when he's talking about, the wash and the hafs and the duri, and what other ones did you mention?
Khalaf
and the kalaf. These are all.
These are the ones that I have is, apart from the hafs, of course, is wash, khalaf, khaled, and duri, harith.
And so what Pehalbo's talking about is the fact that all of these are different people who have inserted their own vowels into the text. And for the most part, because of Arabic language, the texts match up. But there are examples where, because of the rules of Arabic, you can insert different vowels, get different words, and those words change the localized meaning. And so I'm going to give you some more examples of the same using the different readings. Hopefully I'll get across the one that we both, the one that I really like, which is fight and killed. So for example, in Surah 2087, the Hafs read, and I'm going to slow to the Arabic, I'm sorry, I'm not an Arabic speaker, Homilna, where the Kalaf reads Hamalna. Now, Homilna means we were made to carry, and thus the verse reads in the Hafs, they said, we broke not the promise to thee as far as lay in our power, but we were made to carry the weight of the ornaments of the whole people, and we threw them into the fire. And that was what the Samari suggested. Now, the Samari there means Samaritan. That's the word for Samaritan, is Samari. And so what you've got there is the historical error that I referred to earlier. However, if you change the word as Kalaf does, following the Arabic grammar, and you change it to Hamalna, it means we carried. And so the verse reads, they said, we broke not the promise to thee as far as lay in our power, but we carried the weight of the ornaments of the whole people, and we threw them into the fire. And that was what the Samari suggested. Now, one of these has a slightly different sense to the other. Could
you repeat the reference to the passage?
Surah 2087.
So 2087.
Yeah.
Okay. Just want to find it. Let's see. Yeah. So I'm going to just show something on the screen. And I'm sorry, it's in Danish, but I'll translate. Let's see. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to translate because this is a database, and we've got two different Danish translations of the Quran. That's one. That's another. This is the Hafs text, and here we have differences in Quran versions. So this is Abu Amr, Shubah, Hamza, Al-Khazai, Ru, and Khalaf has, but we carried the burdens of.
We carried, yeah.
Yeah, and Haf says we were. We were put upon to carry the burdens.
We were made to carry.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
this is just to show if anyone wants to in Danish to see these things, most of what most of what is in the Bridge translation, and I'll just show this as well. As Professor Jaffel says, there's a Bridge, the Bridge translation,
Yeah.
and the Bridge translation translates the yeah, and it translates the Quran, but it also makes a point of pointing out the differences in the 10 most acknowledged versions of the Quran. And what I've done is to put into my database these differences that the Bridge translation mentions. So you can see that in Danish if we want.
Yeah. So you've got another example in Surah 28:48, where the Hafs reads Sihrani, but the Wash reads Sahirani. And now Sahirani means two magicians, which would make the verse read like this. But when the truth came to them from us, they said, why was he not given? Why was he not given like that which was given to Moses? Did they not disbelieve in that which was given to Moses before? They said, two magicians supporting each other. And indeed, we are in both disbelievers. But Sihirani means two works of magic. So like, so in other words, the two wonders rather than two magicians, meaning that the verse would read like this. But when the truth came to them from us, they said, why was he not given like that which was given to Moses? Did they not disbelieve in that which was given to Moses before? They said, two works of magic supporting each other. And indeed, we are in both disbelievers. So again, that changes it slightly. Are we talking about two magicians doing one work each? Are we talking about one magician doing two works, or about we doing two magicians doing two works each? You know, like, what are we talking about? The text has changed the meaning. Do you want to pull that one up on your screen?
Yeah, I can do that. There we go.
28:48.
Yeah, so that's 28:48, and this is the Arabic Hafs translation, and the difference is that, let's see. Yeah, Hafs has two signs of magic supporting each other, and other versions have two magicians supporting each other. There we have it.
Yeah. So another, and this will be my final example before I move on in my argument. The one that I love the most is Surah 3:146. Do you want to pull that up?
So 3, let's see. Oh, wait. Yeah, 3.
Surah 3:146.
146. There we go.
Okay.
There we have it.
Tell the differences there?
Yeah, so the difference is that Nafi, Ibn Kathir, Abu Amr, and Yaqub has how many prophets have not had many God devotion people with them who has been killed. And in the Hafs, it says, let's see, someone who has battled
fought.
with.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, there's a big difference between fought and killed. Not everybody who fights is killed, and not everybody who's killed has fought. And so, this is a genuine difference to the text. So you've got these kinds of differences in the Quran, but then you've also got differences to the consonantal text as well. So, for example, you've got changes you've got Keithy Small's study of the Pamphisilets of Sana, which people like Dr. Puyin and Dr. Said Reynolds, Gabriel Reynolds. Are you still there, bro? I think he's had a disappearance, probably an internet problem. So I suspect I'm doing this live on my own. Guys, could you just put a 1 in the chat to tell me that you can still hear me?
I'm still here, but I'm just having camera trouble.
Okay, fair enough. All right.
Yeah.
I thought you'd vanished. Right. In that case, I'll press on while you sort out your camera. So you've then got Keithy's small study of the Pamphisilets of Sana, which talk about the fact that, and Dr. Gabriel Reynolds and Dr. Puyin would both acknowledge that the Sana Pamphisilets, which are basically texts, material that's been washed and then rewritten, represent a version of the consonantal script that doesn't match any of the established readings upon which the Hafs, the Wash, the Duri, and the Khalaf are all based upon. It is a different consonantal text. You've also got the studies by I've forgotten his name. Oh dear, who's the guy who owns the YouTube channel Quranic Textual Variants now?
Maybe that would be Daniel Allen Brubaker.
Yes, Dr. Brubaker. You've got Dr. Brubaker, who studied 8 of the oldest copies of the Quran that scholars can get their hands on, has compared them to the Hafs version, and has found that there are corrections, including tapeovers, erasures, text being added to that original to make it conform to the Hafs consonantal text. Now, this clearly demonstrates that the Quran has been changed. It has been edited. It has had man's influence upon it. And you also see this in the hadiths themselves. One of my very first debates at Speaker's Corner was debating these hadiths that clearly evidence the fact that the Quran has been changed, and that the text of the Quran today is not the same as what it was in the past. So I'm just going to try and find an example to talk about something clear. So, like the stoning verse in the Quran. We'll talk about that one. Bear with us 1 second.
Yeah, and in the meantime, I'll just show the corrections in early Quran manuscripts by Alan Brubaker. So it's just 20 examples.
Yeah. Okay, so I found it. It's Sahih al-Bukhari, volume 8, 817. Now, the thing about hadith is that there's different numbering systems. So it may not work that I give a numbering system and then you look it up and that it matches, because Muslims haven't yet agreed upon the numbering system to be used. And there's about 3 different numbering systems out there for the hadiths. So it says this: Allah sent Muhammad with the truth and revealed the holy book to him. Among what Allah revealed was the verse of Rajam. And we did recite the verse and understood and memorized it. That's really important. We did recite the verse and understood and memorized it. Allah's apostle did carry out the punishment of stoning, and so did we after him. I am afraid that after a long time has passed, somebody will say, by Allah, we do not find the verse of Rajam in Allah's book, and thus they will go astray by leaving an obligation which Allah has revealed. So this is a hadith that's clearly saying that at the time of Muhammad, there was a verse in the Quran that was recited, understood, and practiced of stoning adulterers. That verse cannot be found in any Quran today. And the hadith goes on to say, and that they are afraid that people in the future will abandon the Sharia, will abandon the stoning, because they can't find it in the book. And indeed, that debate has already been happening in Indonesia. About 10 years ago, there were Muslim scholars arguing that they shouldn't stone people because it's not in Allah's book. It's only in the hadiths. And where a hadith and a Quran contradict one another, then you follow what the Quran says, not what the hadith says, in theory, though in practice, actually, Muslims often contradict the Quran with hadiths. Now, let me give another example. Yeah, so for example, in Ibn Ishaq, in his Sirat Rasulullah, it states, verily stoning in the book of God is a penalty laid on married men and women who commit adultery, if proof stands or pregnancy is clear or confession is made. So, and Ibn Ishaq, the Sirat literature about Muhammad is actually earlier than the hadiths. And in that Sirat literature, it's saying that stoning was in the book of the Quran, which is now not found in the Quran. Have you? Do you want to do a quick Google search, see if you can find a stoning verse?
Yeah, I'm thinking.
Because I don't think you will.
No, I'm sure I won't. I'm just trying to. I'm just trying to use the database, but I don't remember the keywords. The keyword I need to search for to find the
Let me give you another one.
But I have another one actually.
You have
Sahih al-Bukhari 88. Yeah. So let's just show it on the screen, because here we have it in English as well. Still my database. Yeah. So it's Sahih al-Bukhari, and it says narrated Abdullah bin Abi Mulaika. Uqba bin al-Harith said that he had married the daughter of Abi Ibab bin Aziz. Later on, a woman came to him and said, I have suckled Uqba and the woman whom he married at my breasts. Uqba said to her, neither I knew that you have suckled me, nor did you tell me. Then he rode over to see Allah's messenger at Medina and asked him about it. Allah's messenger said, how can you keep her as a wife when it has been said that she's your foster sister? Then Uqba divorced her and she married another man. This is a reference to the suckling of someone who you need to work with. So let's just see. Here we have Sahih Muslim 1452a. Aisha reported that it had been revealed in the Holy Quran that 10 clear sucklings made the marriage unlawful. Then it was abrogated by 5 sucklings, and the last apostle died, and it was before that time in the Holy Quran and recited by the Muslims. So that's disappeared.
Yeah. So you got 2 examples. So clearly there are changes to the Quran, and statements to the contrary are not false. But now here we're going to segue into a critique of why you can't trust the hadiths, because I want to suggest that the verse about the stoning verse, the Rajam verse in the Quran, being in the Quran, actually is fictitious, and that there was never a time when stoning was in the Quran, and that actually what really happened was that later on, after the Muslim Empire colonized and occupied the lands of the Assyrians and the Phoenicians and the Greeks and the Copts and the Kurds and the Persians and the Berbers, after it conquered and colonized all of these lands and began the process of Arabization, it found that these people were quite fond of stoning adulterers, and that this was actually quite a common practice. And so this practice was adopted as a part of fiqh, but it needed to be supported and justified. Go on, Peralbo.
Yeah, well, I have to interrupt you just for a bit, just to clarify something. Snow says stoning is in the Bible too. This disciple Stephen was stoned to death. Yes, the issue here, Snow, is that that there's a verse that is supposed to have been in the Quran about a punishment of stoning, but it's no longer there. That's the point.
Yeah. Yeah, we're not denying that stoning is also in the Bible. We're talking about the fact that the Quran doesn't have that verse anymore when the Hadith says that it does. But we're segueing now onto my criticism of the Hadiths, because the fact that the Hadith is making a claim that there is this stoning verse in the Quran that can no longer be found is very convenient, don't you think? It's convenient if you wanted to maintain stoning as a punishment. And indeed, on the weight of that hadith, stoning is still maintained in many, if not all, of the schools of fiqh of Islamic jurisprudence. Stoning is the punishment for adultery. And it was a practice that was popular before before the Muslims occupied the land of others in the surrounding regions. And the practice one of the early principles of fiqh was just to uphold local custom, and it's well known among scholars of hadith. I'm not just making this up. Any scholar of hadith will be able to verify this for you, that hadiths were made up to justify positions of fiqh, to justify positions of jurisprudence. And so I believe that this hadith was made up to justify the jurisprudence around stoning. And there's a number of examples of made up hadith. So that in Sahih al-Bukhari, I think it's number 8. I might be wrong. It might be number 6. There's a story about Heraclius, the emperor of Rome. And this is obviously a propaganda hadith. It's made to discourage Christians and to encourage Muslims who are surrounded by Christians, based upon a prior opponent of the Islamic Empire, the Emperor Heraclius, who was a Christian hero because he had managed to overcome the Persian Empire and retrieve the true cross. But there is this hadith out there that tries to suggest that Heraclius wanted to become a Muslim. And in that hadith, apart from the fact that it doesn't read like history at all, it just reads like a common legend, it claims to have knowledge of the private correspondence between Heraclius and his friend back in Rome. And it claims to have knowledge about the private conversation of Heraclius and his priests. Now, the point is, no one in the Isnad chain, and it comes from a man called Abu Sufyan, but no one in the Isnad chain from Abu Sufyan onwards would ever have been able to access the private chamber of the Emperor Heraclius when he's having private conversations with his priests, nor to attend the fabled meeting that occurs in the Hadith between all the Roman elites, or to be able to access the private correspondence of the emperor. So clearly this Hadith is fake. It is fictitious. It is a lie. And yet that story appears in Sahih al-Bukhari, even though it's a clear fabrication. Now,
and just to clarify so that everyone can follow, when this is a problem, it's because the very word sahih means that you can trust it. So sahih means something like trustworthy, be in the right,
reliable.
Correct, reliable, you name it. I've got a complete list over words that you can use in English, 27 different words, but all in that direction.
Yeah. And so clearly you've got an example, you've got examples, I think, of hadiths being made up. There are hadiths that literally are like one sentence long, and it'll be somewhat really vague, like I'm making this up, this is not a real example, but it'll be something like the lines of, and Muhammad sucked the bones of a chicken. And that'll be it. That'll be all it is. Yeah. Now that's not real history. But when you put it into the context of Muslims were debating the finer points of Sharia law, and to justify their positions, they had to link it back to Muhammad. You can see why someone might make something up. There's another example of one hadith scholar. One of the early narrators of hadith was asked a question from some guests from Egypt, in which he was asked about whether during the ablutions you should wash between your toes, and he said no. But then they said, but back in Cairo, or not Cairo, but back in Egypt, we hear hadith reports about Muhammad washing between his toes. And then they tell him an isnad, and he goes, oh yeah, that isnad sounds good. And then he adopts that hadith report. The problem with that is that firstly, it's a historical story, because at the time that this particular narrator lived, the practice of isnad creation and isnad science didn't exist. I might just grab the book so I can read the story to you, just to put it in. Let me just grab the book 1 second, just so I can read it.
And just to explain to the audience, the isnad, that is the chain of narration used in hadiths, so that you have someone telling a story, and then he says, I've got this story from so-and-so who got it from so-and-so who got it from so-and-so who told it on his father's authority, who told, you get the picture. So it's a chain of narrators passing on this particular story.
So this is hadiths, Muhammad's legacy in the medieval and modern world. Is by Jonathan A.C. Brown, who is a convert to Islam, I believe. I'm under the impression, I might be wrong, that he converted because he got married to a Muslim woman. But then he's gone on to become actually a leading scholar, Western scholar of hadith, and he's a Muslim. So this is from his work, and I'm quoting from page 28. Let me just give you one. For instance, when Malik was asked by a student whether or not one should wash in between one's toes when performing ritual ablutions, he said that it was not required. Another student, Abdullah B. Wab, objected, saying that in his native Egypt, they had a hadith through the companion Mustawarid bi Shaddad, telling how the Prophet did wash between his toes. Hearing the Isnad, Malik said, that hadith is good, and I had not heard it until this moment. He acted on it from that point. So what you've got is you've got the clear evidence of this development of fiqh in different regions. And what's happening is that depending on reports, you would have disputes between people. And in this instance, Malik just accepts the hadith report. But how does he know it's true? How does he know that the person telling him is telling him the truth? You know.
Yeah.
I mean, but the point that the actual point I'm making is you've got these disputes about how you do certain things, certain ritual practices. And the tendency was, if you could say that Muhammad did it, you trumped the person that said no.
Yeah.
As just seen in this example. And so this creates the development of hadith. Now, the problem is that there's a rapid numerical growth in hadith. So for about the first 150 years after the death of Muhammad, hadith aren't written. Then they're deliberately not written. And they're not compiled in books, right? But you know, but then later they become, after about 200 years, they become essential to Islam. You know, and so, for example, in Sahih Muslim 304, we read, Abu Sa'id Khudri reported that Allah's messenger said, "Do not write anything about me, and whoever wrote about me other than the Qur'an, then he should erase it and narrate about me. For there is no harm in it, and he who attributed any falsehood to me." And Haman said, I think he also said deliberately, he should in fact find his abode in the hellfire. So there's a lot of Muslims going to hell in the first 200 years because a lot of Muslims made up things and attributed them to Muhammad, but they weren't written down. What happens is, in these debates around fiqh, in these debates around whether we should do X, Y, or Z, there was this sort of arms race to connect your opinion to either Muhammad or his companions. And so you end up with these creation of hadiths. You know, Sunan Ibn Majah wrote, it was narrated that Abdullah bin Abu Safar said, I heard Ash-Shabi saying, I sat with Ibn Umar for a year and I did not hear him narrate anything from the messenger of Allah. Right? So right back in the earliest times, apparently, people were not passing on what Muhammad did. Fasawi al-Umari Marifa on page 15 records this. I never heard Jabir, meaning Ibn Zayd, say the messenger of God said. Yet the young men around here are saying the messenger of God said 20 times an hour. And I never knew of Jabir having narrated from the messenger of God more than 15 or 16 hadith or thereabouts. So what begins to happen is, as time moves forward, the recollection that goes back to Muhammad moves backwards. So the earlier you are in the source material, the later you are in terms of history. So you're either in Muhammad's companions or their students, or their successors or their students. But as you get further later in time, the narrations increasingly go back to Muhammad. So it's an inversion of what you should expect. Patricia Crone wrote this, and she wrote it in Roman Provincial and Islamic Law, page 33.
She's Danish, by the way.
Is she? Patricia Crone?
Yes.
Oh, well,
yeah.
There we go. She said this. Bukhari is said to have examined a total of 600,000 traditions attributed to the Prophet. He preserved some 7,000, including repetitions, or in other words, dismissed some 593,000 as inauthentic.
So that's like 98% or so.
Yeah. It's basically fake. Like, you know, if Muslims are saying themselves that we can't trust most of this material, then, you know, it's not too far for us to go, we can't trust any of this material.
Yeah.
And that is the position of academia.
Yeah. And just to think about the claim that the reason why the Quran should be so perfectly preserved is the ability of the Muslims reciting it, but 98% of all that hadiths in one collection have been dismissed.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Patricia goes on to say this. She goes on to say this. If Ibn Hibal examined a similar number of traditions, he must have rejected about 570,000. His collection containing some 30,000, again including repetitions, of Ibn Hanbal's traditions, 1,710, including repetitions, are transmitted by the companion Ibn Abbas. Now, that should immediately set off an alarm. Because, Parhaldo, how many memories of your mother can you remember? Not, and I'm talking about specifically independent memories, not sort of conflagrated memories.
Yeah.
But
I think well, first of all, in my experience, when you start beginning, when you begin to talk about someone, then more and more stories you can remember. So if it was, like specific memories with my mother, I don't know, 100 maybe,
100
max.
Yeah, I think you're doing well if you do 100. And I don't think that's unreasonable, because most people estimate that number when I ask them. Right? Now, we're meant to believe that Ibn Hanbal remembered 1,710 stories about Muhammad. If we knock off, let's
Could you say that again? How many?
1,710 individual stories.
1,710.
10. Now the thing is, let's knock off 710 for repetition. I mean, I don't know how many repetitions we're talking about, but let's just knock off 710. That means Ibn Hanbal remembered 1,000 individual stories about Muhammad. Nobody does that. The only way because memory doesn't work like that. And we all know intuitively that what I'm saying is true, because we've all got direct experience of memory. The only way you could try to even begin to remember 1,000 individual stories is that you spend your entire life every day trying to remember what you remembered yesterday, and then you add to it today.
The only way I could see coming above, just 500 stories would be to write them as you experience them.
Yeah, but that's the point. Yeah. For the first 150 years, Muslims were not in the habit of writing. There were a few examples of people writing down the occasional thing, but when you look at the kind of things, like if I'm sat under a teacher and I'm recording what he said, I'm going to record things like, what he said in terms of what he's teaching me. But these stories are things like, he sat on his right-hand side, or he laid on his left. He went to sleep on his right. These kinds of things. I mean, that kind of story comes from Aisha.
Yeah.
But these these kinds of stories are not things that people think to themselves, oh yeah, I might need to remember that because in 200 years somebody might think that that bit of information is useful.
Yeah.
Like, that's just not what people do.
No, it seems more reasonable that someone has, kind of discussed how to do certain things, and someone suddenly remembers a story that my father told me, and he got it from so and so, who got it from so and so, and all the way back to Aisha, talking about Muhammad lying on his right side. So that's what we're going to do.
Yeah. But here's where it really, the rubber hits the road, because Patricia Crone continues. So 1,710, including repetitions, are transmitted by the companion Ibn Abbas. Yet, less than 50 years earlier, one scholar had estimated that Ibn Abbas had only heard 9 traditions from the Prophet, while another thought that the correct figure might be 10. If Ibn Abbas had heard 10 traditions from the Prophet in the years around 800, but over 1,000 by the year 850, how many had he heard in 700 or 632? Even if we accept that 10 of Ibn Abbas' traditions are authentic, how do we identify them in the pool of 1,710? So what's happening is, as you go forward in time and the debates about the practice of Sharia get more and more complex, there's this need to invent more and more hadiths. And so you have to attach them to an isnad that people trust, which goes back to Ibn Abbas. And so more and more
just to be sure,
get attached to Ibn Abbas. And so as you go forward in time, the cone of hadiths connected to Ibn Abbas go out like that.
Yeah. So just to be sure I understood that correctly, what you're saying is that within 50 years, it seems to explode with 1,700 stories.
Yeah. That's exactly it. So because the debates...
That's quite a few.
Yeah. Because the debates amongst Muslims, become more and more complex, they need to have more and more hadiths to justify their positions. And so they make up more and more hadiths. But the hadiths have to be attached to someone of authority. And because it became apparent early on that Ibn Abbas is someone you can trust, and then they get attached to Ibn Abbas, more and more hadiths get attached to Ibn Abbas.
Yeah.
And let's not forget, and so either people are hijacking a reliable isnad chain to attach hadiths to it, or Ibn Abbas is just making stuff up. It seems to me that the former is more likely than the latter. The other problem is that the hadiths, Muslims themselves can't agree about which hadiths to trust. The Shia, the Sunni, the Ibadi, the Sufi, they've all got different hadith collections. And they all disagree about who you can trust. So Shia, for instance, don't accept Aisha.
Yeah. But that particular part of they call it hadith science. That particular part of it is extremely problematic, seen from a historian's point of view, because it's taking some people as trustworthy, and thus this story seems to be trustworthy, and other people not so trustworthy. So then that story is not so trustworthy. That's a huge problem, because as a historian, you know that over time, different people are considered to be more trustworthy, and then in a later time they might not be as considered as trustworthy. So what you really get is like a it takes part in one part of history, but it's like it stretches back in history. I don't know how to explain it.
They might be seen as
it's
trustworthy. They're retroactively asserting that a person was
yes,
consistently
yes,
trustworthy throughout the
true, yes,
entirety of their
exactly,
lives.
yeah,
Yeah, that
exactly,
because a person went through a period in their life where they are trustworthy, that means they were always trustworthy.
yeah. Or maybe it's just the people who make the judgment, who make that judgment, maybe not because they even know the person, but because they agree with him.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
for
that's
various
the other
reasons.
point. That's the other point is that you would one of the ideas is you're not supposed to take hadith from a deviant, but who decides what a deviant is?
Yeah.
Because you're using hadith to establish sunnah, and those that are deviant from the sunnah are considered to be deviants from which you can't take hadiths from. But
Mm.
the hadiths are the very collections from which you're creating the sunnah, and then you're deciding who's a deviant based upon your assessment of later hadiths retroactively used to project into the past to judge who's the deviant from which you can take a hadith.
Yeah.
Now, that you can't. It's a completely subjective measure. That a deviant to the Shia is going to be a Sunni, and the deviant to the Sunni is going to be a
Yeah.
Shia, and
I
the
mean,
deviant for the Ibadi is
Aisha,
going to be the former Sunni.
Aisha is a very good example of it.
Yeah,
Aisha is a
okay.
very good example because if Aisha's in the it's not the chain for narration, Sunnis go all thumbs up, and Shias go all thumbs down because she's not trustworthy in their eyes.
Exactly. And so you're what you're doing is you're projecting into the past your orthodoxy.
Precisely, that's my point. Yeah.
And you're also making an impossible assessment. How can anyone look at someone from 200 years ago and go, well, we know that this person was pious, which is another one of the judgments by which an isnad chain is assessed, is by the piety of the people. Well, how can you assess whether someone was pious 200 years ago?
Yeah.
Like, how can we assess that someone was pious 20 years ago? Do you see my point?
Yeah.
It's just not a good science. Another one of the reasons I want to give I gave an example of like peculiar hadith that don't match up to history, and I just want to give an example of that before I skip on to another reason why we can't trust. I mean, I gave the example of sucking bones, but I want to give a real example because that one I just made up. But here's an actual real example. In Sahih al-Bukhari 210, it reads, narrated by Maimuna, the Prophet ate a piece of mutton from the shoulder region and then prayed without repeating the ablution. That's the end of the hadith. Who remembers that? Why would you remember that? Nobody thinks like that. Nobody thinks to remember that. But that hadith makes no sense if you're thinking that the hadith are a source of history. But that hadith makes a lot of sense if you think that the hadiths are a source of fiqh.
Yeah.
And that you've got to make a ruling about under what circumstances you have to repeat ablution. And then suddenly that hadith makes a whole lot of sense, and suddenly it's really relevant. But no one back then who was actually observing Muhammad would have thought to remember that.
No.
So it's clearly invented later. And now I want to give what I think another reason why we can't trust the hadith, and it is the synoptic contradictions that show that hadiths were made up to justify one position over another. And this throws into question all the hadiths. right?
Yeah.
So, for example, connected to the farewell pilgrimage, or the Hijatu al-Wada, right, which apparently took place around 10 years after Hijrah. Okay, depending on which hadith you believe, Muhammad could have said a number of different things. So, for example, if you believe Sahih Muslim 1218, or Al-Jahiz in the Kitab al-Bayan wa al-Tabayin, or the Musnad of Imam Ahmad, hadith number 19,774, or Mishkat al-Masabi 2555, or Sunan Abi Dawud 1905. Muhammad said, I left for you what if you hold up to, you will never be misguided, the book of God. So, in other words, Muhammad's saying, I've left you the Quran. If you follow that, you'll never be misguided. Now, what's the problem with that, Perhalbo? What's the problem with just having the Quran?
Well, first of all, I'm thinking that Islam cannot work without the hadiths.
Brilliant. Right, stop there. That's it. That's all you need to say.
Yeah.
Islam cannot work without the hadiths. So,
I mean, just an example is the number of prayers,
yes,
which they do disagree on.
Yes, exactly.
And,
now,
and the Quran mentions 3.
Yeah. So, and that's a perfect example, well elaborated. But if you believe Jami al-Tirmidhi 3786, Muhammad said this: I left for you what if you hold up to, you will never be misguided, the book of God and my family, the people of the house. Who's that? Who's going to be happy about that? And my family, the people of the house.
Oh, that would be gold for Shias.
That's going to be gold, dynamite for Shias, right? Why?
Yeah.
Because the Shias believe. Go on.
Yeah, they believe that the caliph should be of the Prophet's family.
There you go. But maybe you don't like that idea. So if you look at what Ibn Ishaq, who quoted Ibn Hisham in his Sirah an-Nabawiyah, which is the life of the Prophet, he says this: I left for you what if you hold up to, you will never be misguided, the book of God and my sunnah.
Yeah, that's quite different.
It's very different, because suddenly we're not needing the family, we need the sunnah.
Yeah.
Now, the problem with that is that if you look at every example of the word sunnah in this Quran, it does not use the word sunnah in this Quran in the way that the hadiths use the word sunnah. By sunnah in the hadiths, what it means is what the Prophet said, did, or did not forbid. Right? But every example of sunnah in the Quran never ever mentions anything about the behavior of the Prophet, not once.
No.
So clearly there's a change that occurred that impacted the hadith literature that was alien and unknown to the Quran literature. Something changed between the time of the Quran and the time of the hadith that changed the meaning and the use of the word sunnah.
Yeah.
Right? Now, that is clearly a sign that there is a disconnect, but it gets worse. Now, just in case you were in any doubt that the one about following my sunnah would favor the Muslims, the Sunni, because it doesn't mention the family, you've got these hadith: Jami al-Tirmidhi 2676, Sunan Ibn Majah 42, Sunan Abi Dawud 4607, and Riyad as-Salihin 157, which reads: I enjoin you to fear Allah and to hear and obey your leaders, even if it be an Ethiopian slave. But those of you who live after me will see great disagreement. You must then follow my sunnah and that of the rightly guided caliphs. Who's that going to favor per Haralbo?
Well, that would be the rightly gated caliphs and all those who favor them.
Which is going to be Sunni.
So, so that's basically the Sunni, and yeah.
So clearly, you've got all these different accounts about what Muhammad said on the farewell pilgrimage. They all differ, and they all differ for doctrinal reasons.
Yeah.
So the reality is, when we can see that there are these pressures of competitive sects, competitive legal opinions, and I've not even begun to talk about competing empires, all needing to justify themselves according to hadiths. Yet it ends up that the hadiths are just this factory of lies to justify one camp over another camp. So how can anyone trust what hadiths there are to be used when the mechanism of identifying who to trust is entirely based on the isnad, and the isnad sciences come later? They come around 200 after Itra. They come too late to stop this influx of fake hadith. And they have flaws in the science, such as, well, we measure the piety. Is the person pious? Well, how can you know?
Yeah, and
how can you know
even
that
if
someone was always trustworthy?
And even if you knew, it still, as a historian, I would say it takes out a lot of sources for history if you were to only preserve sources from those you yourself consider to be trustworthy or pious, or having a good memory, because that's not the important things. The important thing is to look at the closeness, both in time and geography, but also you need to look at the opinions of the person and compare it to the opinion of the person who's talking about another person. Does that make sense? It's like if you let's take in Britain, you have mainly two parties in British politics. So if you look at something historical, and the Conservative Party, someone from there would say something about someone from the Labour Party, you would have to consider that source in a different way than if someone from the Labour Party talked about another person from the Labour Party. Yeah. So that would be historical science, but this thing about piousness,
truthfulness
and trustworthiness, truthfulness, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and it certainly doesn't. It doesn't safeguard history. Let's put it that way. Like, and these are based on isnad chains. The thing about the isnad chains is that the thing about the isnad chains is that they start bearing in mind that there were no hadiths being written for the first 100 or so years, right? And then they start to get written down, and they're getting written down and used in argument, because this sect disagrees with this sect, or this scholar, this Qadi disagrees with this Qadi, this judge disagrees with this judge, or because this empire wants to justify its overthrow of that empire. And then, because of all these different factions now arguing with one another, they have to try and play trumps, like my hadith is better than your hadith. And so then, after 100 years, suddenly everybody starts talking about isnads.
Yeah.
And starts taking the whole isnad thing much more seriously. But as Sahih Muslim, for instance, in the introduction to Sahih al-Muslim, right? It says, Abu Ja'far Muhammad bin Usaba narrated to us Ismail bin Zakaria narrated to us on authority of Asim il-Ahwal, on authority of Ibn Sirin, that he said, they would not ask about the chains of narration. And when the fitna occurred, they said, name us your men. So al-Sunnah would be regarded, and their hadith were then taken, and al-Biddah would be regarded, and their hadith were not taken. So what hadiths you accepted depended on which group you belonged to. If you belonged to this group, you didn't accept the hadiths of this group. If you belonged to this group, you didn't accept the hadiths of that group. And that was deciding your isnad chain. So your isnad chain is dependent on your present and on which group you're in.
And we see the same with the Sunnis and the Shias as well.
Yeah, this is exactly what I'm talking about. This is exactly what I'm talking about. But not just Sunnis and Shias, but Khawarij, Ibadi. You've got all these different sects within Islam. We think, we think that Islam is like Sunni Islam and Shia Islam because they're the two main groups. But there was lots of other groups that have been sort of stamped on or that we don't know about or haven't heard about. But that doesn't mean that they haven't got their own isnad chains going on. And so really, the whole hadith of science, and this is the key point to take away, is that the very science that was created to try and safeguard what were or were not reliable hadiths was created 200 years too late. By that point, there had been so many fake hadiths spread abroad that the horse had already got out of the stable before you could close the door. And the hadiths themselves, the hadith science itself, is based upon a knowledge of the people in the isnad chain that itself is dependent upon hadith material. So you're using hadith material to say that so-and-so was an honest person. And you're using so-and-so as an honest person to then justify a hadith. That's circular logic.
So basically, you could have, two people kind of confirming each other. Well,
you're using the same material twice. You're using the material once to identify who to trust, and then you're using it again. And then once you've created your isnad chains based on who you could trust, you're then identifying which hadiths are sahih and which are da'if.
Yeah. But to identify who is pious, trustworthy,
you use the hadith.
You would have to have hadith with change of narrations.
Exactly. So for
containing people whom you need to make a judgment call on whether they are trustworthy. But how do you do that?
Well, I mean, this is the point, isn't it? It's like. So you've got all this literature called the books of biographies, which is the books of the biographies of the people in the hadith chain, right?
Yeah.
And they just take the opinions of scholars and other things to say this person is reliable, this person is trustworthy, right?
Yeah.
And in some cases, the books of biographies have a single sentence saying this person is trustworthy, and that's it. That's all that we know about that person, right?
Yeah.
Those books of biographies come later than the hadith collections themselves. But how do you justify your knowledge of each of those people in the biographies? Each one of those statements requires its own hadith chain to justify its claim. And you end up with this sort of systemic, sort of infinite regress, where for every claim and for every story about every person, you need your own hadith chain, and then you need stories to validate each of the people in that hadith chain, which then requires another hadith chain, which then requires more stories to justify those people in that new hadith chain, which then requires a new hadith chain, and you get this get this infinite regress.
yeah. So yeah,
which
broadly
incidentally does not exist in Islam.
yeah. So but broadly speaking, it's like a very complicated version of circular reasoning.
Yeah, it really
Yeah,
is.
because it's not just circular. It's like a roller coaster ride.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
as you can see,
Yeah.
as you can see, I'm reading books about hadith written by
Mm.
Muslims, right?
Yeah.
And one thing that has become quite apparent to me is that the science of hadith is indeed complicated. There's no doubt about that, but it has been made complicated through Sufism.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it has been made complicated through Sufism, and it is founded on an entirely questionable and faulty philosophy.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
And completely unscientific.
Oh yeah, definitely not historical, definitely not. And that's why
way.
and that's why, as Yasser Qadhi has, admitted, Western scholars do not accept hadith as sources of material. And Islamic scholars only do so based upon their prior belief, and differ depending upon which sect of their prior belief they hold. So there's nothing scientific about it. You know, science is really a misused word in this context.
Yeah.
You know,
it's
more like hadith sophism is a better way to think about hadith science. Okay, so there you go. Reasons why we shouldn't trust the Quran and reasons why we shouldn't trust the hadiths.
Yeah. So that was it was
mind blowing.
It was
it clearly blown.
Yeah, because it's like standing in a storm and just receiving it. So I want to go through some of the comments that have been made.
Okay, just to let you know, I've only got about 7 or 8 minutes left, just so you know.
Yeah, that's okay. But before I do that, I just wanted to say, well, first of all, thank you for coming. But also, if you have a list of references, that would be great, because then I could just put it in the video, so that people can research it for themselves.
Yeah,
that would be great.
I've given a lot of the references in the video itself.
Yeah, that's good. So, just to take them one by one, I have 12, so it's not that much. Okay. Professor Yaffo says, did Pierce say he has collated this document? What I've done is that I've taken all the differences mentioned in the British translation, and I've put it in a database, which I'm using. Yes. So right.
Can you make that public? Can you put that link in the description box?
Yeah.
Can you put it in the description box of this video for people to find it?
Yeah, certainly. It's a database with hadith, Quran, and well, I've even got the Bible on it as well.
Wow.
And there are references, keywords, all kinds of things.
PhD, we just need Per Holber.
So it makes it easier to find what you need, what you're looking for. For example, if you want some hadiths about stoning, you can just search for the search word stoning, and they'll pop out. Yeah, but it's not done yet. I haven't translated all the hadiths yet. It takes time. So right. So Professor Yaffo says also, stoning is in my book of Sharia law, Reliance of the Traveller.
Which is a Shafi. I've got my own copy. Yeah, it's a Shafi book of fiqh, and these books of fiqh basically just demonstrate Sharia law is not from God. It's literally man-made. That these books are literally what make up Sharia law. Manuals of fiqh. So Sharia law is a completely man-made law. Let's just be clear about that, and I'll debate that with any Muslim that wants to.
Yeah. So. Let's see. Next one. They might have made up the stuff about relations with young girls just to make sure they could also have relations with young girls. Yeah. there, yeah, that might
Well,
be.
I don't think that's. I don't. I mean, the reality is relations with young girls was pretty common in the past because people were
Yeah.
ignorant and didn't know anything about childhood development,
Mm.
and so a lot of people had the mentality of if you can bleed, you can breed. Which sadly is a mentality that is echoed by Islamist apologists all around the world today.
Yeah, yeah. So and then this is about the reason that the gospel writers remembered stories is mixed, but basically Jesus repeated his sermons over and over. Then the disciples repeated the stories after Jesus died as they preached. That might be true, but also it might be true that they actually wrote it down as they went. We know that some of the disciples did have the ability to write. For example, Matthew, who was a tax collector, he could not have been a tax collector without being able to read and write. So
I think it's also important to remember that the Gospels are not meant to be viewed or read as video recordings. They are summaries of the life of Jesus. They are summaries of the gospel. They are accounts. And so in that regard, you've got to remember that when you're reading them, that they're a form of literature. They're not meant to be read as a video recording of the life of Jesus.
No, true. So here's a question for Bob. What did Muhammad experience in the cave?
Well, my personal opinion is that he encountered a demon.
Yeah. Sounds about right.
If you look at the experience of him being choked out in the cave with demonic possessions in the New Testament, there's a lot of similarity.
Yeah. The idea that someone is honest and they therefore have a good memory is bonkers.
Correct.
True?
Yeah, those two things do not correspond.
This is one of my regulars, but is the Quran not the perfect guide for humanity? That is not meant seriously, I have to say. No.
No, definitely not.
Right. So Hamza of the Den said that if you cannot trust the Hadith, then you cannot trust the Quran because they're passed down in the same way. So why is this Muslim? Yeah, exactly. That was my point as well.
The reason why Hamza of Hamza Den is a Muslim is because he won't allow himself to be challenged by any Christian that can challenge him. He only debates with Christians who can't challenge him.
Yeah.
And I don't think he's honest.
No. Needs our scriptures too to make the sense of the Quran? I think the question is, do we need our scriptures to make sense of the Quran? And I don't know how you want to answer that question.
Well, I mean, if you believe the Quran, it says if you're in doubt about something, go and ask the people that were reciting the scriptures before you. I think that I don't think that the Quran. I'm saying what I think the Quran teaches versus what I think Muslims teach. I don't think the Quran thinks that it needs the other scriptures to be understood. I think the Quran thinks that it is a perfect explanation of all things, and that it actually has authority over the other books. In other words, it's explaining things that the other books haven't got, rather than needing the other books to explain itself. That's how I read the Quran. My personal interpretation of the Quran and what the Quran is saying.
Yeah. Okay. So I would slightly disagree because I believe that the only way you can make sense of some passages of the Quran is if you know these stories already. The Quran is like, it uses the formula of remember when this person did that and when this happened. So it seems to be required that you know the stories beforehand.
Well, that's a one for the cup of tea when we meet again next.
Yeah. So I think that was it.
Brilliant.
Thank you for coming, and we won't we don't have time for face appearances on the channel today. So I'm sorry about that, but I think we had a very good live stream, and yeah, I
It was a real
appreciate you
pleasure.
took the time.
It was a real pleasure to be your guest, and I'm looking forward to having you on my channel. Just have you got in mind what topic you want to talk about when you come on my channel, to give
Yeah,
everybody, to wet the whistle of everybody?
I was thinking one thing, but now I think maybe I would do something else.
Are you going to tell us
maybe,
what that is, or are you going to keep it secret?
No, I think I'd like it to be maybe a bit more personal. So
Okay.
I'd like
Right.
to talk about why I use my spare time to criticize the Quran. How did I get there? Because it's a story from like a halal hippie and over to a Quran critic or an Islam critic.
Okay.
So
yeah, I look forward to having that. That'll be something different. I look forward to having that chat with you, Palbo. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you.
Peace be with you all. Take care.